Without further ado, our first panelist for this session is Andrija Šoć. Andrija, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I will share my presentation and let's start immediately so that we do not exceed our time slot. So the topic is emancipation through deliberation, and I want to, in a way, connect to previous talks by saying that maybe connect to some of what Natasha mentioned, is that education itself could be seen as a solution to a problem, and that problems are those that we face in a society. And as it was mentioned in the opening speech, there are numerous problems, of which I will mention the following. Let me just press the full screen so that you can see it better here, and let's go through them. Just one. Here it is. So in this talk, I want to expound a few of the primary goals of deliberative education that are tentatively formulated as the following. So make individual and collective decision-making processes more nuanced, then reduce polarization, make opposing viewpoints more acceptable, the two are closely connected, and restore individual and institutional trust. Now, these are some of the key problems that are faced by democratic institutions locally, regionally, globally. And you can see it by failure of opposing parties, of opposing viewpoints, to converge upon something that should be a collective solution to collective problems. And deliberation tries to do just that. It is an institution proposed a few decades ago, though the idea itself is perhaps as old as Aristotle's writings. And it serves to introduce a way for citizens to participate in events in which they can connect their views to one another, challenge their views through rational arguments and other mechanisms, and try to reach some common viewpoint. The earliest goals of deliberative institutions were perhaps too idealistically proposed to be unanimity and complete rationality, but that is not necessary, and it has almost never been achieved in any of the experiments and general research aimed at specifying how deliberation or deliberative institutions can do just that. But education is one answer, and I will try to show in this talk how we can attempt or start attempting to do just that. And the problem of trust, or the decline of individual trust in other individuals or in democratic institutions, is perhaps the most important one, because it has been correlated with lower voting turnout, with failure to participate in democratic institutions, with failure to, as citizens, we take active part in our society. And just, okay. Okay, here it is. So some of quick quotes about the value of trust. So it's probably the main component of social capital. It can be linked to higher levels of political confidence. It contributes to citizens' normative commitment to democratic values and their rejection of authoritarian appeals. It correlates to effective democratic governance and is conducive to stable democracy. So these are some of the key components of trust. And as I will mention, the role of deliberative education is to teach us how to restore it in a way, how to trust our institutions or how to trust one another more. So let's go. Something pops up here. Here it is. And some of the key expectations we have from democratic institutions are the following. So what should be the role of citizens in a society? We should have such options before us that motivate our participation, that inform us as voters, that render the process open to reason giving, something that should happen pre-voting, so as to not only, so as to our democratic performance not consist only in aggregation of our preferences, as has been before the deliberation itself was proposed, and Kenneth Arrow showed why that could lead to rational social outcomes. Also provide accountability on the part of the elected officials, and take into account the preferences of the electoral minority by making the members of this minority more open to understanding what were the preferences of the winning side, so as to not enter a situation in which you have marchers saying A or B is not my president, etc., as has been known to happen. So understanding between opposing parties is key, and deliberative research tries to show, or tries to show how that is upheld and how it can be accomplished. So let me just, okay. So what deliberation does, it, sorry. So what deliberation does, what deliberative research does, or at least I will say one aspect of it, Jörg Steiners and his associates, is formulate a discourse quality index, which measures the quality of deliberation on an event. So the setup of the event is fairly simple. You have 20 or 30 participants. You formulate a topic that can be as wide-ranging as, say, propose the measures for ensuring the economic progress of your country, or as local as, let's see what we can do with the municipal square. Let's see how to set it up. Should we vote for a fountain or a monument? Things like that. All of these things have been researched and participants thrown into the discussion on these topics. And what Steiner and his colleagues do is measure each individual utterance. So when a participant raises a hand to talk and says something about the topic, they analyze it through some of the following 7 criteria. So they try to look for the following: whether a speech act was interrupted or not, how long a speech act lasted, whether a participant received due respect from other participants, and for instance, the disrespect could be seen as sarcastic remarks or even scoffing. The moderators do not exist in these events, but they're only passive researchers who merely measure each of the utterances. Then they try to look at to what degree speakers offered reasons in support of their views, whether the speech act referred only to personal or to common interests as well, whether during the process of deliberation participants changed their mind in light of a well-founded argument, and whether speakers told personal stories in support of their views, how connected they were to the topic of the discussion, and whether it was combined with rational arguments. And here is one snapshot of the results of the quality of deliberative performance. So there was an event in Colombia which included ex-guerrilla members and ex-paramilitaries. So you all know that there was a decades-long conflict, bloody conflict between opposing parties in Colombia. And when the conflict stopped, those who were members of the guerrilla and those who were paramilitaries were brought in the same room to discuss now what to do with said former combatants. And they discussed, and it was not easy to set up. I will not go into details, but here is what happened. So of those members, of the 20 or 30 or 40 members, the number of people varied, 34% did not speak up at all. 30% spoke up only once or twice. And see, down below, only 1% of the participants spoke up 21 to 30 times. Now bear in mind, these discussions last relatively long, and there is plenty of time to say anything, and because each individual utterance is measured as one basic unit, to speak up 20 or 30 times is not that much. But of those present, 64% either did not speak up at all or said only 1 or 2 things during the whole event. So that doesn't seem too favorable for a deliberative mechanism, but I will try to say that quite the opposite actually should be the upshot from these events. And at the right-hand side of this slide, you see that 36% provide of those who spoke. So of those 66% who spoke, 36% did not provide any justification at all for their views. And of those who gave more than one reason in connection with the opinion, so something that you would call a high quality deliberative performance, there were only 3% of those participants. Now, bear in mind that these guerrilla members, paramilitaries, they're not skilled deliberatively. They do not have deliberative expertise or any background in how to deliberate, how to talk in these types of events. And that was precisely the point of the research, to see how to bridge deep divisions, and it cannot get much deeper than this kind of setup, within such contexts where many of the participants had only elementary school completed and only some of them were university graduates. And aside from the previous 7 criteria, here is another key component of the speech or entire deliberation that Steiner and his colleagues try to measure. And it is called deliberative transformative moments. So there are positive and negative DTMs, and let's start with the definition of a negative DTM. It occurs when the preceding speech act was at a high level of deliberation, and the current speech act transforms the discussion to a low level of deliberation. The flow of the discussion is disrupted. The topic debated so far is no longer pursued. Under these circumstances, it is not easy for the other participants to continue the discussion in a meaningful way. So what is a negative transformative moment? We talk, we try to argue our points, we maybe converge to some sort of suggestion. Well, participant A can say Colombian government should provide former combatants with some sort of financial help. And the other participant B says, yes, I agree, it should institute a cheaper healthcare or social programs that should benefit us all. Or participant C then continues and says, yes, and it should be easy to qualify for those benefits. This is the sort of progressive, positive contribution. And then some participant D remarks, no, all of this is foolish. Government never did anything for us at all. There is no reason to continue talking like this. This is a negative DTM. And it quickly devolves into arguing about whether there is any point at all in trying to reach some common solution. On the other hand, positive DTMs occur when someone breaks from that tendency and says something constructive, and then returns the whole group towards some, say, positive way of contributing to the discussion. And here is why I think we shouldn't view the results above, these low percentages here, as something entirely, let's say, pessimistic. It is because even in those situations when not many people talked, when there were very few situations in which someone gave a reason for their stance and it contributed to the overall goal of the discussion, there still were plenty of positive transformative moments. That is, the group that is initially deeply divided and cannot agree in the discussion itself started to converge upon some sort of solution. And here's how it connects to an educational goal. Here is from the book of Steiner and his colleagues, the same book that discusses DTMs and DQI, Deliberation Across Deeply Divided Societies. Here's what they say. Teaching the skills of deliberation must be a long-term process that begins at an early age in schools. Having understood deliberative lessons, children may also teach their parents. If successful, the process will lead to a snowball effect through the generations. And I will return to the other quote in the end. So you see, they propose a sort of educational curriculum that would incorporate deliberative events and help children, school children, high school students, university students do perhaps the following. Improve interest in the area of social, political, economic, and cultural issues of one society. Reinforce argumentative thinking and critical examination of the content provided in these areas. Practice one's preference ordering and impartial discussion with peers and teachers. And finally, increase openness to hear dissenting views. Now, what should help us decide that we are not actually too idealistic when we formulate these goals? Well, here is the structure of the positive outcomes, positive DTMs that happened in Colombia. So there were 79 cases where our discussion transformed to something positive. And in 15 of 79 cases, telling a personal story helped the discussion and made others view the opposing viewpoint more favorably. It is very important to know that personal stories did that. And in 14 of 79 cases, so roughly the same, but just a bit less, providing a rational justification had that same effect. And conversely, personal stories helped bring about positive DTMs more often than rational arguments, whereas rational arguments more often contributed to negative DTMs than personal stories. And here is what is important, that personal stories initially help bridge the deep divisions by showing one participant, a former guerrilla member, that the problem that bothers ex-paramilitary, with which he was in a war against for decades, years and decades, they actually have much more in common than there are differences between them. And personal stories do that more effectively than rational arguments. Now, this is not to say that rational arguments are not needed. They, of course, are needed. But without personal stories, without something that connects opposing parties, rational discussion cannot start easily or cannot continue easily, which is why rational arguments tend to produce more negative outcomes than positive in comparison to personal stories. And the reason why personal stories are so effective is actually something that should help us formulate an overarching normative goal for a deliberative educational curriculum. And that is the view that communication should be cooperative rather than competitive, as is, for instance, taught when there are debate clubs or debates of any kind, debate competitions, where something we see in political arenas across the world, where opponents try to beat each other, to try to win something. No one wins anything when we have competitive communication, not when we try to reach some common solutions. And cooperative communication does have to be, I think, something of a normative goal that can be inculcated into school children as early as such curricula can be introduced. And some suggestions are as early as first grades of high school, so 15, 16, 17 years old.
Five.
And, okay, I will be done quickly. One concrete model of cooperation I have in mind, and we will go quickly through this, is Grice's, something that is very well known in philosophy of language, but I think fits very nicely in educational theories, in political philosophy, in political science, in deliberation in general. Here is Grice's idea. Our talk exchanges are characteristically, to some degree at least, cooperative efforts. Each participant recognizes in them, to some extent, a common purpose or set of purposes, or at least a mutually accepted direction. This purpose or direction may be fixed from the start, e.g. by an initial proposal of a question for discussion, which is exactly what is done in deliberative events, or it may evolve during the exchange, which is also what tends to happen. So you can see how this fits nicely with the previous talk. And here is one general cooperative principle. Make your conversational contribution such as is required at the stage at which it occurs by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. So this is something of a normative goal that could be a part of teaching children how to discuss their viewpoints and how to show and how to demonstrate their willingness to listen to others. And here are the 4 maxims that Grice also mentions that should be part of this cooperative communicative performance. Maxim of quality, make your contribution true, so do not convey what you believe is false or unjustified. Maxim of quantity, be as informative as required. Maxim of relation, be relevant. We've seen that not all reasons are connected to the opinion and in deliberative events, and that contributes to the lower DQI. And maxim of manner, be perspicuous, so avoid obscurity and ambiguity, and strive for brevity and order. And in a deliberative setting, as a sort of a normative reformulation of this cooperative principle, we could say the following. All participants in a deliberative event ought to make their conversational contribution, such as is required, at the stage at which it occurs, by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which they are engaged. So just a small reformulation of this that could be a part of, say, the beginning or the normative setup of an educational curriculum. And let us return to something in the end, and this is, as you see, the final slide, something that was mentioned in the previous talks, and that is Kant's idea that one has to dare to think, sapere aude, as was mentioned. I think the first 2 speakers mentioned it explicitly. And to dare to think means to think autonomously. And for Kant, that is crucial, because to be in a society, to be an active citizen, is to be free, equal, and independent. But deep divisions, the issue of polarization, the trust, they show us that when we dare to think, all of us, what happens is that we can sometimes also disagree. And each of us daring to think differently than others by itself is not something that prevents polarization. But let's say something that, let's make something explicit, I think, that is embedded in Kant's ideal. And that is also dare to be proven wrong, which means dare to think for yourself, but also dare to discuss your viewpoints with others. Do not retreat to echo chambers, discussing your issues only with those who already agree with you, because that is not independence. But also explicitly dare to be proven wrong, or as I mentioned in the abstract, dare to be disproved by good arguments. And because positive DTMs show that even in the settings of deep divisions, without prior experience, without much expertise, former combatants can start to agree to converge on some viewpoints. To upscale these results, I think, is very promising, because what if you introduced all of this to those who are not so deeply divided, at the outset at least, who do want to have some expertise and who can begin to hone their deliberative skills, where then I think you will see much higher DQI, or much higher quality in deliberation, and much more frequent occurrence of positive transformative moments. And here is an ideal which I hope does not sound that utopic now that we mention all this, also from Schleiner's book. So here is the goal. So here is the answer to why still education, as the conference is named. When school children later become citizens, they should have learned to respect people with whom they differ with regard to ideology, ethnicity, race, religion, social class, and other identity-creating attributes. A culture of peace and tolerance will hopefully develop. And as I try to show, the way to do it is to implement both DQI as a post-hoc descriptive tool and Grice's normative principles of cooperative communication as a way to formulate any deliberative curricula. Thank you.